Hello, my people of the world. Welcome back to My Kind of Love, the podcast that is about all things love and healthy relationships. I'm Olivia Baylor, licensed clinical therapist, relationship coach, and book author. Today, we're taking a 5-minute in-depth look at relationships by discussing domestic violence. Plus, you will be given homework to work on your relationship goals at the end of this podcast. So let's get started. So I want to start off by talking about domestic violence. I'm recording this podcast now on March 31st. So if March 31st, 2020. So if you are tuning in, you're almost certain to have heard about what has happened in the world during this time. And so a lot of people ask me about healthy relationships, domestic violence, and, just discussing those different types of things during this time period. So this podcast is going to take a little look into domestic violence. This is our season 2. And so by it being our season 2, we're going to look at just healthy relationship and healthy relationships traits. So we're going to start off first by talking about domestic violence. Domestic violence can come in different forms in a relationship. Sometimes while you're in a relationship, you don't identify it as domestic violence. Instead, you assume that your partner is passionate about the way that they interact with you. Within domestic violence, there are different forms of abuse that can be portrayed by your partner. It includes physical abuse, emotional, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, and financial abuse. With the new inclusion of the internet, there's also now internet abuse, which is, we see a lot more of that happening more often. And so there is something called the power and control wheel that was developed by, that you can find more information about on the Domestic Abuse Intervention Project, that there are some warning signs that you can actually kind of see and discuss. So what we're going to do is we'll break down each week the different sections of the wheel, and then we're going to talk about them. And so hopefully you'll be able to identify those traits that are unhealthy traits that a person may have. So some of the parts on the wheel include using coercion or threats, using intimidation, using emotional abuse, using isolation, minimizing, denying, and blaming, using children, using male privilege if this is a heterosexual relationship, using privilege if this is an LGBTQ plus relationship, and economic abuse. And so far, if anybody is experiencing domestic violence in their household, you can always reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. That's 1-800-799-7233 to give you some help in regards to those different types of traits. So what I'm going to do is this podcast is actually going to be a little bit shorter, because what I want to actually ask others before we even jump into it is, have you ever been in an unhealthy relationship that you've experienced domestic violence? And if so, what got you to the point where you got out of that relationship? So I want you to first talk about domestic violence, your perception of your domestic violence in the relationship, and then if you've ever been in a domestic violence relationship, how you got out of it. That's going to actually be your homework that we're going to do before we start jumping into discussing the power and control wheel and domestic violence in a relationship. So these are traits that you just want to be mindful of. So what we will do in the upcoming podcast is we'll be discussing each one of the sections of the power and control wheel, and you will be receiving homework that you can work on each section so you can easily identify domestic violence in a relationship. And then we'll take a look at that and see what traits you can put into place, provide you some resources, and go on from there. So everybody has received their homework. Again, make sure that you continue to document and utilize any type of notebooks or manuals that you're using in order to keep this information. I want to thank everyone who joined me on My Kind of Love podcast. Today we discussed domestic violence, and you provided with homework to work on talking about any past domestic violence relationships you've been in, how you were able to end that relationship, what type of traits you would see in that relationship as well, that you want to make sure that you don't go into another relationship having. I look forward to meeting you again to continue on this journey. Don't forget to subscribe to my podcast, read my blog, and my YouTube channel. You can find more information and goodies on my website at oliviabaylor.com. That's www.oliviabaylor.com. Take care and stay safe.